Over to you, Ambassador.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in around the world, and welcome. I'm Peter Thomson. I'm the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, and my office, together with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, has organized this event. Our program will begin with an opening segment in which we shall be addressed by 4 very distinguished speakers with mandated responsibilities for the UN Ocean Conference, which, as you know, will be held in Lisbon next year. This will be followed up by a panel, which I have the honor of moderating. The panel is made up of 6 prominent representatives who, through the organizations they represent, have a firm stake in fostering the flow of finance into support for SDG 14 and the sustainable blue economy. After the panelists have addressed us, we will entertain a question and answer session, during which I'll pose to the panelists a range of questions that have been submitted to us on the subject of financing SDG 14. The event will come to an end in about 2 hours' time. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So as mentioned, next year, the United Nations Ocean Conference will be held in the beautiful harbor city of Lisbon in Portugal. Thus, to kick off this webinar, I'm going to now invite my distinguished colleague, His Excellency Ambassador Francisco Duarte Lopez, the permanent representative of Portugal, to address us all. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much. Let me first thank the Special Envoy, Ambassador Peter Thomson, and our colleagues from UNDESA and OLA for organizing this webinar, and especially thanking them for keeping the momentum and the conversation going on implementation, the implementation of SDG 14. And it's a pleasure to take part in this opening panel alongside USG's Zhenmin, Miguel Serpa Soares, and Special Envoy Peter Thomson, and also Ambassador Susan Mwangi of Kenya. Portugal was one of the countries that very early on pushed for a standalone goal on the ocean, in the agenda, in the 2030 agenda. We were convinced then, as we continue to be convinced today, that the ocean plays a central role in the path towards sustainable development, and that tangible, universally agreed targets are key for sustainable development around the world. Like the whole 2030 agenda, achieving SDG 14 will not happen unless we mobilize the necessary means of implementation. And like anything else that is aimed at building something meaningful and durable, implementing Goal 14 requires committed, significant, reliable, and also long-term investment. This investment is not only urgent and necessary, it is also smart investment, and it also needs to be the right investment. When investing against these challenges, we are also laying down the foundations of the development, and I start quoting, the development of the ocean economy in a way that balances the needs of people, planet, and prosperity, end of quote. This is particularly important as we seek to build back better, greener, and also bluer, of course. And this aim, that was already central before the pandemic, turns out to be crucial and critical now after the global health crisis we are now dealing with. The ocean economy is currently at risk from multiple stressors, ranging from over-extraction, direct habitat damage, pollution, and climate change. Continuing with business as usual, with this business as usual trajectory poses great risks to the health and integrity of the ocean, and therefore to the world's population, including the future well-being of hundreds of millions of people in coastal areas and in island communities. To change this trajectory, it is imperative to build ocean resilience and minimize ocean risks by restoring, by protecting, and by effectively managing human use of and the impacts to ocean ecosystems. The ocean contributes significantly to food security, transportation, energy supply, tourism, and many of the planet's most critical ecosystem services, such as carbon and nutrient cycling, climate regulation, as well as oxygen production. According to the UNDP, the ocean contributes around $3 trillion per year to the global economy, or about 5% of GDP. So the value of ocean non-market services, and about 63% of all such services provided by the planet's ecosystems. Investing in the ocean is therefore a matter of survival, and it should be about seizing the opportunity to promote a new approach where the ocean is seen as a sustainable source of prosperity and of well-being. For that to take place, we need a coordinated effort to mobilize the necessary resources. We need the combination of public and private investment, a blend of old and new sources, traditional mechanisms, and innovative financing tools and instruments. This is very much at the heart of the upcoming UN Ocean Conference, to be organized by Portugal and Kenya. A conference focused on science and innovation, on concrete, transformative solutions that facilitate a new kind of relationship between humankind and the ocean. One of our goals is to promote a stronger involvement of the financial and philanthropic sectors in the discussions on conservation and sustainable use of the ocean. The private sector is the main driver of innovation and the engine that produces creative solutions, as well as unlocking investments and key resources to support change. I would therefore like to stress the importance we attach to having ocean-related businesses, investors, and innovators participating in this global conversation, as well as partnering with governments and other relevant stakeholders with a view to finding the solutions we are seeking. This has led us, as some of you know, to organize the Blue Economy and Investment Forum in Cascais, back-to-back with the UN Ocean Conference, together with several partners, as well as to guarantee that representatives of the private sector would be able to participate in the official segments of the conference. While we had to postpone the conference, for obvious reasons, Portugal and Kenya's commitment remains unchanged, and we will go ahead as soon as conditions will permit. And because this commitment remains unchanged, so does our goal to make this conference a platform for change, and so does our need to prepare as best as possible in order to be able to deliver when we get to Lisbon. We therefore look forward to continuing to work with you and to partner with you in the context of the preparations of the UN conference and beyond. Let me also especially greet the representatives of the private sector and civil society in general, and allow me a special greeting to Tiago Piticunha, who is heading the Oceano Azul Foundation, with whom we have been partnering, not only regarding this Sustainable Blue Economy Forum, but also the Youth Forum and the participation of youth in the Ocean Conference, and the youth forum that we want to organize, we plan to organize just before the conference are also essential to be sure that youth is effectively involved in the preparation and in the organization of this ocean conference. Thank you very much, Peter.
Sorry, they were trying to unmute me there. Thank you very much for that, Ambassador, and really thank you for highlighting that point about recovery from the pandemic and how we have this smart future, which is the green future. But let's everybody always say blue-green future, because the sustainable blue economy is such an essential part of that green recovery. Thank you for your words. Ladies and gentlemen, when the United Nations General Assembly welcomed the co-hosting of the conference by the governments of Portugal and Kenya, everybody was delighted that the model of a developing country and a developed country continued for the co-presiding and co-hosting of the UN Ocean Conference. And as such, with the governments of Kenya and Portugal now co-presiding over the conference, representing the government of Kenya in our webinar today is Ambassador Susan Mwangi, the Charge d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of Kenya to the United Nations in New York. And I welcome you to this webinar, Ambassador, and now give you the virtual floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Thomson. Good morning and good afternoon, distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank Ambassador Peter Thomson and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs for organizing this meeting. We welcome this opportunity for the continuous dialogues among key Sustainable Development Goal SDG 14 stakeholders, despite the postponement of the second United Nations Oceans Conference due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The current pandemic has resulted in devastating health and economic impacts, which have led governments to prioritize relief measures aimed at saving lives and livelihoods. Virtually all sectors of the economy have been adversely affected, and the impact of the pandemic on ocean sectors, including fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, and coastal tourism, has led to unprecedented unemployment levels, resulting in low incomes and depressed demand. This vicious cycle continues to impoverish many populations, especially in developing countries and particularly in Africa. While governments remain a key and primary actor in driving SDG 14, the availability of development resources and sources continue to dwindle. The economic showdown resulting from the pandemic has put most countries at a greater risk of not fully realizing our common development goals by 2030. As our attention shifts to recovery efforts aimed at building back better and bluer, it is also critical for us to focus on green and blue recovery efforts rooted in collaboration and partnerships. Numerous opportunities exist for effective public, private, and civil society partnerships in the achievement of SDG 14. In this regard, it is important for us to promote coordination, coherent linkages, and synergies between government, civil society organizations, and the private sector, including for investment in SDG 14. Excellencies, the contribution of oceans to the global economy is evident. The blue economy has the potential for transformative socio-economic development and growth, particularly in developing countries. At a global level, it is estimated that 90% of the world's cargo is moved by marine transport, and fisheries and aquaculture supplies 4.3 billion people with more than 15% of annual consumption of animal protein. In addition, over 30% of the global oil and gas produced is extracted offshore. And finally, coastal tourism is the largest market segment in the world economy, comprising 5% of the global gross domestic product, GDP, and 6 to 7% of global employment. At a regional level, Africa is home to 38 coastal states, with a maritime zone of roughly 30 million square kilometers. Our lake zones cover 240,000 square kilometers, and transboundary river basins are 64% of the continent's land area. With these vast resources, opportunities for investments in the blue economy are plenty and can greatly assist with GDP growth for the entire region. The private sector's ability to mobilize investments, resources, and innovate is therefore a necessary avenue for our governments to deepen progress on the SDGs, including SDG 14 and its targets. In working to attract public-private partnerships for SDG 14, it is important for governments to take on a facilitative role in order to attract investors. By continuously reviewing the investments environment, governments can ensure that business and private sector investments are in a better positions to maximize their returns. Governments should also consider modernizing and simplifying various legislation, regulations, and standards to make the economy more business-friendly, thus allowing for considerable strides in reducing the cost of doing business. In Kenya, such reforms have seen improvements in literary or continental and international business climate indices. For example, in the last 7 years, Kenya has improved its ranking to number 56 globally in the ease of doing business according to the World Bank. And if this trend continues, we will be looking forward to even further improvement in our ranking. This notwithstanding, numerous small and medium-sized enterprises in the blue economy sector are faced with various challenges, which include skills, technology, and financing gaps, thus hindering their growth. As we work to attract investments in SDG 14, it is important to extend the necessary support to these enterprises, including through training, technologies, and credit facilities, which will further expand their opportunities for growth through the creation of jobs and, in turn, prosperity. Excellencies, as I conclude, Kenya was proud to host the first global conference on sustainable blue economy in 2018, together with our co-hosts Canada and Japan. The conference provided a platform for action-oriented discussions focused on the productivity and sustainability aspects of the blue economy. Participants made numerous voluntary, non-monetary and monetary commitments amounting to about $172 billion in the various sectors of the blue economy. And the conference also had dedicated private sector and civil sector forums, which generated important commitments around partnerships for the achievement of SDG 14. Looking forward, as a co-host of the second UN Ocean Conference, we will be incorporating a Sustainable Blue Economy Investment Forum, which will include the highest political leadership as well as business leaders and other key stakeholders. And this forum will accord the opportunity for innovators, investors, scientists, government representatives, and or to forge meaningful partnerships for the achievement of SDG 14. And finally, we need to be cognizant of the reality that SDG 14 cannot be achieved in isolation. It will require deliberate coordination and collaboration with the investment programs of other related SDGs and their targets, including climate action, biodiversity, food security and nutrition, and livelihood, to name a few. In addition, I'd like to reiterate, Kenya's governments cannot do this alone, and we very much welcome partnerships with the private sector and civil society. Kenya looks forward to a successful and fruitful panel discussion, and I thank you.
And I thank you, Ambassador. Those are excellent points, which I hope the UNDESA have caught every one of them for circulation. And thank you for mentioning the 2018 Sustainable Blue Economy Conference held in Nairobi, November 2018. That was a real global groundbreaker. One of the things that I'd just like to remind everybody about is that in Kenya, we emphasize that lakes are also an important part of our work. Because when you think of the Great Lakes of the African continent and the North American continent and Eurasia, they have the same problems as the ocean when it comes to blue crime, when it comes to sustainable aquaculture and the environmental problems that they have. So thank you very much for those wise words. And it's now my honor to introduce Liu Zhenmin, who is the UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. I'm sure you know that Mr. Liu has been designated as the Secretary General of the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, in which role he serves as the focal point within the UN Secretariat for the organization of the conference. The floor is yours, Under-Secretary General.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all colleagues. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on investing in SDG 14. I'm very honored to join Mr. Thomson, Mr. Lopez, Mr. Wang Yi, and my colleague Miguel Soares in this opening session. The ocean has long been suffering from the impacts of human activities that lead to marine pollution, overfishing, acidification, and deterioration of the marine ecosystem. But some of the impacts will be long-term impacts. But on the top of existing immediate challenges facing the ocean, we have seen the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the ocean-based economy. This has brought global tourism to a standstill, leaving seafarers stranded at sea and plunging hundreds of thousands of small fishermen into poverty. I think Mr. Thomson and Mr. Wang Yi just mentioned the blue economy. That really blue economy has been hit very seriously. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and strengthen our efforts in this decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, the projections on achieving SDG 14 look grim. Indeed, even before the pandemic, actions and dedicated resources for the implementation of SDG 14 were insufficient. The stakes are high. Attention to the threats of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the declining health of ocean are critical as we begin to look ahead to post-pandemic recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver on our promises to protect ocean, an active investment at scale is urgently required. We need solutions based on science and innovation. I set out in the theme of the forthcoming UN Ocean Conference to be convened in Lisbon next year. Insufficient financing is one of the greatest bottlenecks that prevents the world from achieving SDGs, including SDG 14. It has been estimated that achieving SDG 14 by 2030 will require about $175 billion per year. However, at present, only $25.5 billion is spent annually. This indicates a funding gap of $149 billion per year. Governments must take a leading role in closing the financing gap on SDG 14. Policymakers at all levels should create an enabling environment that provides the predictability and stability for capital to be mobilized. Strategic investment should be incentivized in marine environment-friendly technologies such as zero-emission marine transport, offshore wind farms, and sustainable coastal infrastructure. Further investment must be leveraged for traditional sectors, particularly small-scale fisheries. The private sector plays a critical role in funding SDG 14. However, the current contributions of the private sector is estimated at 8% of total SDG 14 financing. This is why this is very limited compared to other goals. Innovative financing, such as blended financing and debt financing, should be further explored and promoted through public-private partnerships. Maritime industry should also develop more clearly structured projects that can deliver quantifiable benefits to attract more investors. Banks, insurers, investors, and other private sector partners should redirect their products and services towards transition to a sustainable blue economy. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable blue economy offers a needed solution to bring economic benefits and create jobs while safeguarding marine ecosystems and protecting the ocean. Recent research from the World Resources Institute suggests that sustainable ocean-based investment will yield benefits at least 5 times greater than the cost. I would like to share one relevant example with you. The coastal city of Xiamen, China, was suffering from severe pollution in the 1980s. Over several cycles of integrated coastal management, its coastlines has since been transformed into a model of ecological and economic success. It now provides opportunities for leisure and tourism, residential real estate, a venue for industries, and home for rich biodiversity, including the return of the Chinese white dolphin. It is estimated that every dollar you invested in the increased integrated coastal management project in Xiamen has returned $7 in economic benefit to the city. Investing in SDG 14 is investing in the future, well-being, and prosperity of the planet and humanity. That's why we need to advocate the investment in SDG 14. That is what the world should do in the coming years. I thank you.
And I thank you, Undersecretary General Liu. Thank you for reminding me about Zhenmin. I was there myself a couple of years ago, and I witnessed firsthand what you were just talking about. I was particularly impressed with the huge mangrove restoration project in the middle of the middle harbor of Zhenmin, and the fact that not only was tourism benefiting from that, but also that the real estate surrounding the mangrove restorations was all going up greatly in value. Why? Because people want to live in healthy environments. So great example, and I thank you for that. And thank you for also underlining, as the other speakers have done, the importance of partnerships as we go forward with this investment in SDG 14. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, my dear colleague, Miguel de Serpa Soares, who is the Undersecretary General for Legal Affairs and is the UN Legal Counsel. So Undersecretary General de Serpa Soares has been designated as a special advisor on ocean and legal matters to the co-presidents of the UN Ocean Conference. And I look forward to being with him in Lisbon. I now give the floor to you, Undersecretary General.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning and special greetings to both ambassadors, Ambassador of Kenya, Ambassador of Portugal, and my colleagues, Zhenmin, and yourself, Peter Thomson. Thank you for organizing this webinar. I think that together we're striving to keep the momentum for ocean action, which is more important than ever in light of the postponement of the 2020 United Nations Ocean Conference. Now, while the pandemic has prevented us from meeting in Lisbon this year, it has given us this opportunity to reflect on what it means to invest in sustainable development goals, in particular, Sustainable Development Goal 14. Now, it is my conviction that achieving Goal 14, which underlines the development of sustainable ocean-based economies, has to rely on effective legal and institutional frameworks which govern human uses of the ocean spaces, activities, and resources, and that states need the capacity to do so. So the field of my expertise is law, so I will refrain from talking about investment and similar matters. However, I think we can all agree that investing in the achievement of the SDGs and in effective ocean governance are means to support and promote sustainable ocean-based economies at all levels. Moreover, there is an increasing understanding that achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by promoting sustainability through effective ocean governance may provide new opportunities for marine economic activities. And the importance of this point cannot be underestimated, particularly at a time when traditional livelihoods derived from the ocean are being challenged. So allow me to briefly address two ways in which my office contributes to the work undertaken by states in the development of their sustainable ocean-based economies. First, just like ocean species cannot exist outside their marine ecosystems, sustainable ocean-based economies require robust and healthy legal framework to thrive. And financial and other investments in the oceans do best in a stable and predictable environment that balances interests, accommodates new activities, avoids or manages conflicts, and that is resilient to shock, such as the global health crisis. Fortunately, at the global level, we already have the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Convention, which is one of the most important and complex legal instruments ever negotiated under the auspices of the United Nations. And the Convention sets out the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. It is often described as the Constitution for the oceans. Now, the Convention provides the legal certainty which is necessary for the development of sustainable ocean-based economies. It sets out inter alia the rights and responsibilities of states with various maritime zones, and it also strikes a careful balance between the equitable and efficient utilization of ocean resources on one hand, and the conservation of its living resources, as well as the protection and preservation of the marine environment on the other hand. Now, the Convention is strengthened by its implementing agreement relating to the implementation of Part 11 of the Convention on the International Seabed Area and by the United Nations Fish Stocks Agreement. And as a framework instrument, the Convention forms the foundation for a web of binding and non-binding instruments, including sectoral agreements and policies that touch upon all economic activities in the ocean, from fishing to shipping, seabed mining, as well as new uses for oceans. So you are all aware of the ongoing discussions on the development under the Convention of a new treaty on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ process, also known as Beer No Juice. It is hoped that the new instrument, which is expected to come out from this process, will further strengthen the Convention and the legal regime of the activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So my office, through its Division for Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea, the WALOS, which is the Secretariat of the Convention, as well as a number of General Assembly ocean-related processes, continues to support the work of member states in their efforts to implement this legal order. Now, the second aspect, at the same time, it must be stressed that this implementation requires significant human and institutional capacity. And this brings me to the second point, which is the capacity building imperative. If the legal order is central to unlock the potential of the blue economy, the capacity to effectively implement this legal order is crucial. And this is especially true for developing countries and in particular small island developing states and least developed countries. The capacity requirements for the sustainable management of ocean spaces, activities, and resources are significant. Yet, the ability to effectively manage our relationship with the ocean is required to unlock the potential of sustainable blue economies. So again, through the WALOS, we assist member states in reinforcing their capacity to implement the legal order for the ocean through a wide range of programs. And as an example, I would like to provide in the context of today's discussions is that of the Oceans Economy and Trade Strategies project, which is implemented in partnership with UNCTAD and with funding from the UN Development Account that is being managed by our colleagues in UNDESA. Now, this project assists coastal developing countries and small island developing states to identify their competitive ocean-based economic sectors, understand the strengths and weaknesses of their related ocean governance frameworks, and build the capacity of the key stakeholders to develop sustainably these frameworks and the ocean-based economic sectors. And this project is a clear example of how effective ocean governance allows member states to integrate the targets of Goal 14 with policies that stimulate the blue economy and how these can serve as a catalyst for new and innovative investments in ocean activities across several economic sectors. So I conclude on this last point, which I consider important for the following reason. While official development assistance and philanthropy remain significant sources of investments in sustainable ocean-based economies, innovative finance solutions and new revenue streams, including from private sources and through blended approaches, will be required to advance the capacity of states and to harness the benefits of the blue economy for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wise words, Undersecretary General. You know, when people talk about financing SDG 14, what I have found in my work over the last few years is that those who are being asked to part with the funds need to see solid plans. And those solid plans, you know, which we call marine spatial plans, need to be based on two things. One is good science, which is why the UN Decade of Ocean Science is so important, which is coming up. But the other is on solid law, on, as you put it, stable and predictable ocean governance. So thank you for making that point. And of course, that applies both to the EEZs, and thankfully we have UNCLOS for that, but also for the high seas. And thank you for the work that you're doing through BB&J to develop that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the opening segment of our webinar. And I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank those four distinguished speakers for the trouble they put into preparing those remarks and delivering them to us. Thank you so much. We're now moving on to the panel segment of today's event, during which we will be addressed by 6 distinguished panelists, all of whom will, in the first instance, address us for about 7 minutes each. And then we'll hear from each of them further later during the question and answer segment of the webinar. Our first panelist is Anthony Cox, who's Deputy Director of the Environment Directorate of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD in Paris. While working in OECD, Anthony has led a number of teams working on issues closely related to SDG 14, including fisheries and water, climate, fossil fuels, subsidies, and green finance. Anthony will kindly open the panel segment by giving us an OECD perspective on the current situation regarding the financing of SDG 14 and how we can better turn on the taps to get financial flows entering the sustainable blue economy. So Anthony Cox, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter, and many thanks for the opportunity to join the panel this afternoon to discuss what's becoming an increasingly critical issue. How do we get more finance into the ocean? And certainly meeting the triple ocean challenge of driving growth and development, generating jobs and income, and ensuring sustainability will not be achieved unless we get that finance to flow into the ocean sector broadly defined. And while we expect the ocean economy to double in size to some $3 trillion by 2030, this will only be sustainable if the finance and investments that are going into the ocean are supporting sustainable activities. At the moment, the signs aren't great that we're achieving this goal. In terms of ODA, just 0.8% of total official development assistance between 2013 and 2018 targeted sustainable ocean activities. And that's around half the total funding going into the ocean sector. In terms of the SDGs, SDG 14, as we've heard, is amongst the least funded of the SDGs by both official development assistance and philanthropic development funding. According to the latest data from the OECD's SDG Financing Lab, total commitments to the ocean amounted to some $2.9 billion in 2017. And on the other side, we're about to launch new data from the OECD's review of fisheries in early December that brings together the support to fisheries that is provided by 39 countries that report to the OECD. This amounts to some $9.4 billion each year between 2016 and 2018, which is going into support fisheries. This is equivalent to around 10% of the average value of landings in those countries. Now, this does include some useful things such as fisheries control and surveillance, but also includes some $3.2 billion each year on reducing the costs of inputs such as fuel and fishing gear. So we have a situation where we have insufficient funding on one hand, coupled with perverse incentives on the other hand. And this is a particularly messy policy problem. Now, our focus at the OECD is on policy and policy coherence. So I'd just like to highlight three key areas where I think policymakers need to put their efforts in order to make immediate progress on solving this ocean finance question. First, I think we really need to learn the lessons from the vast experience that has been built up in the green finance world generally. There's been enormous advances in the funding of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, and we need to harness the lessons from that experience for the ocean challenge. In many ways, ocean finance is a relative latecomer to this game, and there's still quite a bit of work to do to get up the learning curve and to harness the advances in financing models, in fintech, in new products such as blue bonds and blue carbon, and that the kind of progress we've seen in other areas. I would particularly highlight in this area the issue of sustainable finance taxonomies as somewhere where we should be investing our efforts in the immediate term to catch the wave, if you like, of interest both from regulators and from asset managers and the finance world in the importance of this taxonomy question. Second, we need to better link our ocean financing needs and strategies with the longer term planning process for the ocean and the long-term strategies to support growth, income, jobs, and sustainability. Now, the fact that the ocean is a multi-sectoral, multi-jurisdictional environment with a very tricky mix of public and private goods throws up real challenges for both policymakers and the finance world. So how do we achieve a balance and manage these trade-offs between ocean management goals? How do we finance public goods such as mangrove protection, coastal zone management, where we need to ensure steady revenue streams? And this is a major challenge for us. We're seeing some new models come into play, but we need to see if and how these can be scaled. Some areas where I think could be really exciting in the short term are these blue bonds, which will not solve the problem, but they're an important part of the puzzle, and blue carbon, where I think there's a very exciting opportunity to bring together different dimensions of environmental challenges. Third, and linked to the first 2 points, I think we need to pay closer attention to project preparation and project pipelines. We've heard this from our distinguished speakers who's at the start of this webinar. Now, there's been considerable progress made in capacity building in other areas of green finance and investment and in building green project pipelines. We need to do the same now for blue project pipelines. And this is a constant request that we hear time and again from asset managers and from banks. In this regard, we need to get policymakers, regulators across levels of governments talking the same language as investors, investment managers, and international financial institutions. We need to look at better ways to aggregate projects across the coastal and ocean environment. We need to get these to scale, and this can be facilitated by paying a lot more attention to the development of these blue project pipelines. So this link to pipelines and strategies, I think, comes up again and again whenever we talk about different new business models, when we talk about the role of IFIs, when we talk about the role of regulators, and I would underscore that this is something we need to pay great attention to, and we can do in the short term. So I'll leave it there, Peter, and I look forward to the discussion in the rest of the panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Very thought-provoking stuff, and I agree with you so much about the taxonomy. You know, I find people so often talking at each other rather than with each other in the same language here, and that's a big challenge before us all as we develop these project pipelines and learn from the green movement that's preceded us, the green financing movement that's preceded us. With that, I move on. The clock is ticking, and you know, ladies and gentlemen, we were to have Amida Salcia Alistia Bana, the Executive Secretary of United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, that's ESCAP. But due to a last-minute change in her schedule, she's unable to join us. In her place, we are delighted to welcome Stefanos Fotiou, who is the Director of ESCAP's Environment and Development Division. Director Stefanos, my colleague, the virtual floor is yours.
Ambassador Thomson, Excellencies and good colleagues, thank you very much, first of all, on behalf of ESCAP, for invitation to participate in this dialogue. Ambassador, let me start a little bit here with a kind of institutional but also personal story on how ESCAP engaged so much on the ocean. So right now, ESCAP is one of the UN agencies that it's really working a lot of oceans. That was not the case until 3 years ago, and it was actually the Ocean Conference in 2017 that ESCAP participated. And Ambassador, I do remember it was 6th of June, the second day of the conference. I visited in your office and I asked you what you think we should do in ESCAP to advance the conference agenda. And you told me, go back to ESCAP and make ocean the raison d'etre of this commission. And 3 years after, we are in a place that just a little bit, about 5 months ago, ESCAP adopted a resolution on the sustainable use of the oceans. So now there's an increasing mandate from the ESCAP member states to the Commission to work more on ocean. And this has happened because the ocean represents a lifeline to tens of millions of people around the Asia-Pacific region. So our member states recognize that the ocean is at the heart of any effort for sustainable development. And in the last Commission session we had, they identified 4 areas that they want to increase cooperation. One is on investment on sustainable fisheries and investment on sustainable tourism. And they highlighted that investments in fisheries, for example, must observe and be compliant with international agreements and incorporate provisions to deter illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. A second area that member states of ESCAP want to see more work is on, and more investments, is on greening the shipping industry, which must prioritize and foster investments on greening the economy. The third is the big need to improve the data, statistics, and accounts we have for the ocean, so we promote evidence-based policy making. And the fourth, last but not least, area that member states of ESCAP want to see more cooperation is invest in better waste management on land in order to prevent leakages into the marine environment and to prevent the marine pollution. So allow me in the next 3 minutes, Ambassador, to go through 3 areas that we believe in ESCAP we need to focus on our effort to increase investments for SDG 14. One is the policy coherence and especially the relation between landscapes and seascapes. We need to, I think, to understand when we evaluate investments, when we look about blue or green investments, we need to understand the relationship and the causality between the landscapes and the seascapes. So we need to do this in order to overcome environmental challenges. We need to assess and support comprehensive investment packages that they are both green and blue. I don't think we should look at green investments or blue investments. We should look at them under one package. And I want to mention some numbers here. Anthony, I think, mentioned that the ocean economy represents a value of $2.3 trillion right now. I want to mention another number, Ambassador, which is the value that it's represented by the plastic industry, which is about $1.2 trillion. So a single sector, an extremely polluting sector, representing a value which is equal to the 50% of the ocean economy. But I'll give you another figure what 1.2 trillion means. $1.2 trillion means 41 times, I repeat, 41 times the combined GDP of the Pacific Seas. So there's some vested interest on sectors that they are so large that sometimes they distort the way that financial institutions are looking investments in for a sustainable use of the oceans. So the plastic industry is an element of the wider fossil fuels also dependence of the economies, and we address this. It means we are not only blue oceans but also green climate. The second is about the financing of SDG. We need to, I think, to use different financing mechanisms. I know that I will say something that it's a little bit a taboo for developing countries. Although we need a lot of international finance, we need more international finance. I think that we need to look at domestic resource mobilization and how domestic resource mobilization could support the efforts for a blue ocean. Because we need to make sure that we have a very big set of tools, of instruments, of any kind of financial instruments to promote SDG 14. And I think this is extremely important to promote targets like SDG 14.6, which prohibits the certain forms of fishery subsidies that may contribute to overfishing. So we need to see, I think, a package of financial mechanisms with fiscal measures that they could promote these investments. The last point I would like to do, Ambassador, is about systemic issues and about the need to increase the capacity, especially of the seeds, to foster on green investments. We need adequate capacity and training at all levels of governance, I would say, and not only at the central government, but at the local government and subnational authorities to secure the effective implementation and enforcement of policies and the SDGs. In this way, I just want to mention one initiative that ESCAP has recently started with the support of the Japanese government, focusing on the ASEAN region. It's called the Closing the Loop, and it's actually a contribution to the ASEAN framework of action on marine debris, that we try to have new visualization methods to understand how plastic is going to the sea, and at the same time to find to match, make a one-to-one matching of investment needs and investment mechanisms that they can be found to tackle the problem of marine pollution. So to conclude, I would like to underscore the need to engage also, Ambassador, all stakeholders in this process, especially when it comes to financing. We cannot forget the private sector and the strategic advantage of developing public-private partnerships, not only to invest on SDG 14, but also to guarantee the feasibility and success of green investments and green finance in general. Thank you very much.
And thank you, thank you very much for that, particularly for your words on investment in waste management, and we'll come back to that a bit later during the Q&A, especially on the source to sea side of things. Of course, ESCAP has such a huge responsibility in that regard with the region that you cover. Our next speaker is another colleague of mine who was referred to earlier by Ambassador of Portugal, who's done a huge amount of work in helping us prepare for the UN Ocean Conference. He is Tiago Peter Thomson, who's the Chief Executive Director for the Oceano Azul Foundation. And Tiago has been working on ocean policy for 2 decades now with the government of Portugal and the European Commission and the United Nations. His accomplishments are far too long for me to list, so just let me quickly give the floor to you now, Tiago.
Thank you very much,
especially, I think, especially for your perspective from a philanthropic and NGO lens. Good to see you, Tiago.
Same here. Thank you very much, Ambassador Peter Thomson, and thank you to UNDESA for organizing this webinar. I'm very honored to share the floor with the distinguished ambassador of Portugal, Francisco Duarte Lopez, and the distinguished ambassador of Kenya, Susan Malwandi, and also, of course, with the 2 distinguished Secretary Generals. I also like to salute all colleagues of this panel, and starting saying that I'm really happy to be able to help keeping the momentum for SDG 14. We all know that the ocean is often, if not always, overlooked. Gets less political attention than climate, the biodiversity, forests, or fresh water. In fact, we can even say that there has been little change within the ocean arena in the last 20 years at a global scale. And I think that if we look at the Paris Agreement, or if we look at the fact that BBNJ, despite all the efforts that have been done, including the ones referred by the Secretary General for Legal Affairs, that we don't have still robust results, are clear evidence of this. So the ocean is also underinvested, that other speakers already mentioned. This is actually why in the philanthropic area, Oceano Azul was created by our shareholder. They realized that in order to have some social corporate responsibility, the ocean was probably an area where they could make a difference, given the low investment. So the fact that the ocean is public domain, of course, does not make it easier for private appropriation, and therefore there is less business, less funding compared also even in terms of investment with other SDGs. The good news on this, I think, is the fact that SDG 14 became a monument to ocean action and is a truly achievement of the ocean within our multilateral international agenda or system of governance. I think that if today the ocean is part of the agenda, it is because of SDG 14. And I think that we should not stop recognizing and acknowledging that. So we defenders of the ocean sustainability, defenders of the ocean value, have an obligation to keep the momentum. And I, in this context, look forward to the meeting in Lisbon, UN Ocean Conference organized by Portugal and Kenya, and we are ready to deliver our strongest efforts in supporting this meeting, so you can count on us, Peter. In the context of this webinar, the goal, I understand, is to mobilize public and private resources, sector resources, including the charities and philanthropies. And well, I can speak from the point of view, as you asked, of Oceano Azul, which is a private philanthropic organization, a philanthropy, which was born with a chief idea. And this idea was that the ocean's problems cannot be solved through ocean conservations alone. We need the economy. Only the economy can do the trick. And so we need a different economy. An economy that recognizes itself as being a layer for sustainable development next to the other 2 layers, and under the layer or subject to the layer of environmental sustainability. We rather have to stop looking at this concept of sustainability as pillars and start looking at them as layers in which ones depend upon the others. Also, it is important, and I think that there are being developments that nature becomes part of the economy, and that the environment is the economy of the future. Nature becomes a primordial resource of our economy. This, of course, is the theory of natural capital, and of including nature in the cost-benefit analysis. And it is interesting to see how this is evolving, starting from the sustainable, the principles for sustainable economy finance developed by the European Investment Bank, by the European Commission, WWF, the International Unit of Prince Charles, I understand at that time, to the report released this week on the bankrolling extinction report, which is denouncing how financial institutions provide the capital for the overexploitation of our lands and seas. So it's very interesting to see that there is an involvement there. Of course, in concrete terms, and to finish, I would like to give a couple of examples of how the Oceano Azul Foundation is trying to contributing on the ground. We do that by advocacy and by preparing concrete programs. In advocacy, I would probably underline this blue call to action in which we have been involved with the Oak Foundation, with the great support and work of Ocean Unite, which has allowed us to gather more than almost 500, more than 450 organizations behind a clear ocean agenda. That ocean agenda also clearly supports the implementation of SDG 14. I will give a very concrete example where we have in SDG 14b that we need to provide access for small-scale artisanal fishes to marine resources and markets. This blue call to action, Rise Up, says that within territorial seas, we should prioritize access for sustainable small-scale fishing, preventing industrial threats and recognizing and promoting community-based management. This is an example of how we can move in terms of advocacy. And of course, another example is a program that we have with the Bank and Foundation to promote entrepreneurship for startups of blue biotechnology, which not only contribute to create growth and jobs on the ocean without depleting the marine environment, but help us to dissociate raw materials from natural resources, which is probably one of our chief goals for the future, because that's where we will be able to balance our economic development with our existence in the planet. I would like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to provide two clear examples of what Oceano Azul is doing, and wish you very good luck for your efforts in keeping the momentum for SDG 14. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiago, and thanks for those kind words about SDG 14. I fully agree with you. And also for your emphasis on including nature in cost-benefit analysis of future global economy. And for your mention of not just the blue call in action, which is I also endorse, but also the sustainable blue economy finance principles, which those interested in those can find them at UNEP-FI. Look, it's now my pleasure to introduce, to thank, and I think apologize to Mayor Helps of Victoria in British Columbia, who must have gone up at some, when it was still dark up there, let's put it that way. Mayor Helps is our fifth panelist, and she is the, as I said, the mayor of Victoria in British Columbia. And she is, as such, mayor of a prominent port city. And she brings a practical eye to the funding of the sustainable blue economy as such, and has hands-on experience of such thorny civic responsibilities as civic infrastructure, urban effluent controls, and post-pandemic planning. Tough stuff. Your worship, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. As the ambassador said, I'm in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, and this city is built on the homelands of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, the Lekwungen-speaking people. And when we speak in Canada publicly as public officials, we always begin by acknowledging the Indigenous homelands. So as mayor, unlike all of the wonderful talks that we've heard this morning that are very, very important at a high-level policy perspective and high-level financing, I'm going to be bringing a very on-the-ground or perhaps at sea-level perspective with concrete examples of what's happening here in my city to achieve SDG 14 and to invest in the blue economy. I'll begin briefly by talking about some of the efforts at the national scale, some of the provinces' focus, and then really spend most of my time sharing examples with you of on-the-ground efforts here, mostly having to do with some of the innovative private sector innovations and financing models that are coming forward. I know that some of you may wish me to talk about tourism and cruise ships and building back better and effluent control, and I'm happy to do that when we get to the questions. I believe that because Canada, BC, and Victoria are near the beginning of developing blue economy frameworks, although we may be behind some of the other nations like Kenya and Portugal who have been thinking and working in these ways for some time, we are starting now with the urgency of achieving SDG 14. So at the national level, Minister Jordan, who's our Minister of Oceans, recently discussed how the global pandemic has underscored our vulnerabilities, but also how it offers us a chance to incorporate the oceans as part of our Building Back Better strategy. So to this end, the Government of Canada is earnestly right now developing a blue economy strategy that will be part of its Building Back Better approach. To solidify this and underscore its commitment, in its recent speech to the throne in September, the Blue Economy Framework was noted as a key pillar of the government's rebuilding and Building Back Better strategy. So from the perspective of a mayor in a coastal city, that's very encouraging to hear. So too with British Columbia. British Columbia's Restart and Recovery Strategy has a focus on innovation and innovation clusters. And we see that, again, as a coastal city, as lending itself to some of the efforts that we're undertaking here. So now to turn to Victoria. Coming out of the pandemic, we have created a plan called Victoria 3.0. Recovery, Reinvention, and Resilience. And it's a 20-year economic action plan to reinvent our economy coming out of COVID and to create more resilience. One of the things that we want to emphasize in that plan is our significant and underrealized economic opportunity for Victoria as a coastal island community on the Pacific Ocean. So in Victoria, we're close to the shipping gateway to Asia-Pacific markets, and we're also a critical transit point to the Arctic Ocean. We have been hard hit by the pandemic. As you know, we're a tourist town, and part of pivoting means looking at how we use our oceans differently, not only for the arrival of cruise ships. And again, I can talk about that in the question period if you'd like me to. So a key action in Victoria 3.0 is the creation of an ocean and marine economic cluster that delivers value to both local and global customers, and this is really important, that is oriented towards the 22nd century. So our vision is that by 2030, Victoria is known globally for leadership in the blue economy, with high growth, globally oriented companies that anticipate and solve the challenges of the 22nd century, creating high value jobs and leaving the ocean and the planet better than we found them when we began in 2020. So not surprisingly, the Ocean Futures Economic Cluster will operate through a blue economy framework. As many have already stated, the blue economy recognizes the increased and I would say urgent advantage offered by intersecting business growth and development with responsible ocean use. Sustainable ocean use, sustainable and responsible, I suppose. A key action in Victoria 3.0 is to grow existing enterprises and attract new ones, where the resulting products, services, technology, know-how, and intelligence supports that arc that leads to sustainability, climate change, mitigation, and adaptation, and achieves Sustainable Development Goal 14. So we're working very, very deliberately on a blue economy framework and SDG 14 as part of our economic recovery strategy. As both of the ambassadors from Portugal and Kenya said in their opening remarks this morning, the private sector innovates and they are key to creating solutions. And that's why we've been working alongside the private sector from the very beginning. They are integrally integrated into the formation of the Ocean Futures Cluster and the Ocean Futures Innovation Hub. I'm just going to share a couple of quick examples and then wrap up and look forward to the question period. So while the SDGs have a 10-year time horizon, we also here on the island are thinking bigger and longer. And in addition to being grounded in the private sector, we are very deeply grounded and rooted in the knowledge, the 12,000 years of ocean knowledge coming from Indigenous communities. And so we've been working very closely with Indigenous communities. They have ocean knowledge and data that we can only begin to imagine. In addition to working with Indigenous communities, Ocean Networks Canada, and Google it if you're not familiar with it, is an amazing organization located here at the University of Victoria. They monitor the west and east coasts of Canada and the Arctic Ocean continuously and deliver their data in real time for scientific research. So you can go onto their website, you can look at any given moment about what's happening underwater anywhere on the west, Arctic, or east coast of Canada. It's incredible. And they provide lots of evidence-based information and data that's really helping to drive companies here. And to talk quickly about some of our amazing companies, there's one small company that has a big impact already. It's called Open Ocean Robotics. They build boats for industry and government that are solar powered, travel nonstop for months, produce no greenhouse gas emissions, and have no risk of pollution or oil spills. And they sell these boats to companies and to governments to monitor and protect at-risk whale species, to allow ships to voyage on more fuel-efficient routes, to crack down on illegal fishing, and to enable us to better understand the impacts of climate change. Another local company here, Cascadia Seaweed, they are cultivating seaweed. They're farming seaweed with a whole bunch of applications ranging from food security, climate change, addressing economic instability, and many other things. So I will stop there. There's a lot more that I could tell you about the work that we're doing. In order for any of this to succeed, it will require private sector investment. And as I've said, we've had our companies, large and small, at the table from the beginning. We're going to continue to work with these companies, with First Nations, with post-secondary institutions, and we are planning to launch the Ocean Futures Cluster and the Ocean Futures Innovation Hub early in 2021. And I look forward to sharing more with all of you as this project unfolds. Thank you, Ambassador.
Yes, and thank you to Mayor Helps. You know, as a grandfather of three beautiful granddaughters, the youngest of whom is about 3 months old now. She's going to be 80 at the end of this century. And so I'm so glad to hear that cities like yours are planning ahead to the 22nd century. You know, I am emotionally involved in how the world will be when the 22nd century starts. Every time I look at this beautiful little girl here in my house. Anyway, so well done on that. And I really look forward to the question and answer session and coming back to you on some more of those urban related matters. Our next speaker is Babita Bisht, who is, in fact, the fifth panelist. I got my numbers wrong. Babita is the Deputy Director of the Division of External Affairs of the Green Climate Fund. And Babita has long experience covering humanitarian development and climate change issues. And at the Green Climate Fund, she leads strategic outreach and partnerships with governments and the UN and civil society and the private sector. Babita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow panelists, on behalf of the Green Climate Fund, it is really an honor to be part of this conference and to be part of this conversation. In light of the preceding discussions, what struck me is that we probably can say that we sit at the heart of the color chart, blue and green. And I'd like to cover three key points, particularly now. Why oceans matter, key issues for public-private financing, and the role of GCF, Green Climate Fund. Too little attention has been paid to the impact of the climate and the ecological crisis on ocean systems, ecosystems. At the same time, ocean ecosystems and marine life are crucial to curb climate change. Investing in marine ecosystems is investing in carbon storage, oxygen generation, food, and nature-based adaptation, and specifically covering both mitigation and adaptation benefits, which is really important for us. From a mitigation side, coral reefs, mangroves, marshes, and seagrasses sequester and store more carbon per unit area than terrestrial forests. And these and wetlands are a source of irrecoverable carbon, which once released will take tremendous efforts to recapture. And from an adaptation side, we see coastal ecosystems strengthen coastal communities' resilience to storms, floods, and erosion, and they protect lives and livelihoods. They also protect biodiversity and fish stocks that improve the economy and food security. For example, we know that coral reefs protect people and property from extreme weather events through breaking as much as 97% of wave energy before the waves reach the shore. This kind of evidence and data is so important to us in our investment decisions. In the context of COVID-19, investing in SDG 14 also helps countries to recover better, promoting economic growth, poverty alleviation, job creation, and improvement health. And this is also a really important part of how we are framing the kind of coming board meetings in terms of our investment pipelines and what gets to the table. And yes, there is a financing gap. Despite the urgent need to protect our natural mitigation and adaptation services, there is a widening financing gap to protect and restore ecosystems worldwide. We are witnessing rapid ocean warming and acidification at a pace that is not being sufficiently countered by the growth in financing for conservation and climate action. And today we've been asked to share how public investments can be effectively used to encourage private funds for the advancement of SDG 14. And to start, I think, again, public-private partnerships are critical because public funds are not enough to drive the transformative change that we need to see at the scale and speed needed to avoid catastrophic climate change, particularly now with COVID-19, which has dramatically reduced fiscal capacities in developing countries. So then what does this entail? And I think I'd like to highlight two key points from a finance perspective. One is addressing the demand and supply of finance. So from a supply side, and we see this across the board, even when you talk about the green economy, from a supply side, investors are looking at risk-return profiles, and the market risk still misaligned with climate reality. We need better information to price climate risks and balance them against the upfront costs of investments required. And financiers also need financial products to invest in and bankable projects that create investment opportunities. And from the demand side, entrepreneurs and others and governments also face a range of policy, institutional, and technical barriers to convert investment opportunities into bankable climate projects. The second, I think, key theme is how can we crack the code on blended finance models that work for SIDS and LDCs, and I think that also links to the point made by Anthony before. Blended funds have proven effective in de-risking renewable energy investments, for example, but this financing approach is still at the beginning stages for investments in nature-based solutions such as ocean conservation. And I think in this, there's a whole range of issues here that we can look at and talk about innovative financing instruments and structure rates. How can we have the most optimal mix of grants and non-grant instruments to close the deal? De-risking investments at scale, which looks at both policy de-risking, because of policy environment, the regulatory frameworks that are important, as was mentioned earlier in the conversations, but also the financial de-risking that really brings in or crowds in the finance, especially from the private sector. How can we aggregate and securitize investments at scale, because scale matters for private investors, and also looking at new initiatives like debt swap for climate resilience. So, that's all kind of fun stuff. So what is the role of the GCF or the Green Climate Fund? We are the biggest climate finance facility, and our mandate is to promote a paradigm shift to help developing countries move to low emissions climate resilient paths. We are mandated to balance investments between adaptation and mitigation for 50-50, which is a very unique feature of our fund. And with a network of over 150 public and private, national and international organizations, we support initiatives in a way that we are capital agnostic. Basically, we provide a range of grant and non-grant instruments that help to de-risk investments in transformative climate projects that also support the blue economy and marine conservation. We have a very strong focus on private sector, investments. We have a private sector facility, and we also have significant private sector partners who are accredited to us, which includes the big commercial banks like BNP Paribas, Mitsubishi, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, among others. We have private equity companies like Pegasus, social impact funds like Acumen, and also all the multilateral development banks, including the IFC's accredited fund. So, that gives us a lot, a big pool of stakeholders and partners with whom we can work with, and we do work with. And again, we truly recognize the interdependence between ocean action and climate action, and we are rapidly increasing investments in coastal and marine ecosystem protection. However, we are here to say that we would like to do more, and we know we can do more. And this also comes back to the conversation we had earlier in the year with the Special Envoy and Madhu. And I think, again, thank you so much for bringing us, bringing us into these conversations that are really important for us in terms of looking at pipelines and hopefully doing more on this front. And again, for us, it's really important that our partners know that we have one of the biggest capacity building funds to help countries access climate finance. At present, we have about $255 million, and countries eligible to receive $3 million over 3 years if this includes adaptation planning, for example. So that's a resource there. In addition, our project separately the support includes, helping countries to develop bankable funding proposals. Again, using the optimal mix of finance instruments, that's really important in terms of, finance. I'll end with a few examples. We have provided about $35 million to the Blue Action Fund project. It's an ecosystem-based adaptation program in the Western Indian Ocean covering Tanzania, Madagascar, South Africa, Mozambique, and we're supporting local NGOs to protect ecosystem services and help vulnerable coastal populations adapt to the impact of climate change. And this is done with the German development institution, KfW. At the same time, we're in conversation on the green with the Global Fund for Coral Reef. We see this as a very promising coalition and bringing in, a range of public-private partners, including finance instruments, and that's something that we see as very promising. And before I end, I'd also like to highlight the potential of investments in SDG 14 from a green-blue recovery perspective in the context of COVID-19. Again, economic stimulus measures that prioritize nature-based solutions and investments in ocean conservation projects are important because they require limited retraining, can create jobs, create new income opportunities, increase food security, and alleviate poverty. So again, we see all these multipliers, and again, in the context of COVID-19, this is something that we are in conversation with our partners on. And an example today that's, I think, very relevant to this conversation is that today our board is supposed to consider a $1 billion kind of range of projects, which includes a very interesting project which has a blue infrastructure component with the IUCN and Pegasus, creating a subnational fund where Pegasus, which is a private equity company, will set up an equity fund where they would like us to be the anchor investor, putting in $150 million in equity for a project that is $750 million total. And IUCN would like us then to also provide technical assistance around, I think, $18 million to help develop, with the government to help private sector programs, engagement plans. Again, that all comes back to, projects and how can we really invest in a way that's country-driven and can really drive that forward. And the last point here is that we have mobilized about $10 billion. We'll see what happens now with the outcome of the US election to finance our strategic plan over 2020-2023. We have started our sectoral consultations on key areas because this is really important to help shape our investments in the coming years. We will initiate consultations on ecosystems, and we would encourage all our stakeholders to participate, and hopefully, UNDESA can provide us names and organizations who would like to be part of this. So I will conclude by saying that we are a partner, and we can help design and provide a wide range of financing instruments to make climate projects in developing countries low risk, bankable, and attractive to investors. And so please, again, I think our major ask in these forums is just, please collaborate us. That would be, thank you.
No, thank you very much, Babita. And I think you can be guaranteed that we'll be knocking at the door of GCF a lot between now and the UN Ocean Conference. Thank you for those tangible examples of work that you are doing, especially in the blended finance area. We're now going to listen from our final panelist, who's Ingrid van Wees, who is the Vice President for Finance and Risk Management of the Asian Development Bank, ADB. Ingrid has kindly arranged for the Asian Development Bank to prepare a video that we'll now watch. We can learn from it about ADB's experience arising from its $5 billion action plan for a healthy ocean and sustainable blue economy. Over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to address you as part of this distinguished panel on investments in SDG 14. Historically, much of our investments and development impact were focused on terrestrial ecosystems, and SDG 14 was underserved. To do it justice, we had to put a spotlight on it and focus a team. In 2019, we launched our Healthy Oceans and Sustainable Blue Economies Action Plan. This plan focuses on the protection and restoration of coastal and marine ecosystems, on the reduction of pollution, and the creation of inclusive and resilient coastal communities and livelihoods. The fund is $5 billion, and the funds will be used for technical assistance and to catalyze and mobilize third-party funds for investment in marine ecosystems. So how do we go about implementing our projects? We go about it by working closely with governments and the financial sectors. And I have 3 areas of intervention with the governments I would like to share with you today. First, adjustment and creation of a conducive regulatory and policy environment. It's about the elimination and redirection of harmful and counterproductive subsidies. At least $20 billion of annual fisheries subsidies are harmful and counterproductive. They benefit large industrial fleets, increasing their fishing capacity, resulting in the crowding out of artisanal farmers and further overexploitation of fish stock. The creation of a conducive ecosystem for investments in sustainable blue economy is the second area we work on. To address plastic pollution in Southeast Asia, we developed a Source to Sea program, funded with technical assistance, in order to support government with the development of supportive regulatory and policy frameworks. Second, regional cooperation. As we all know, regional cooperation is key to establishing and enforcing agreements for the management of borderless ecosystems, such as the ocean. We in ADB view it as part of our mandate to assist regions in this process. Since 2007, ADB has been supporting the protection of the Coral Triangle, a unique biodiversity hotspot. The aim of the Coral Triangle initiative was to significantly strengthen the regional policy dialogue by building institutional capacity and improving governance of marine protected areas. The third point is about funding blue investments. And here I would like to distinguish between 3 categories. First, those that are already commercially viable, such as offshore wind farms in Europe, sustainable wheat farms in Asia, or some mangrove restoration projects funded by Blue Project. We can leave these to the private sector. The second group are the projects lacking some aspects of bankability. Financial innovation and assistance are needed for these investments to address these issues, such as, for example, heightened credit risk, or revenue shortfalls. We can use financial instruments which are conventional to address these risks, such as subordinated financing, first loss tranches, or guarantees to reduce credit risk. To address revenue shortfalls, we can think about subsidies, tax holidays, or blue credits to finance the gap. Blended and leveraged finance can play a catalytic role here in enabling private sector participation. The most challenging category are the essential blue projects which lack any form of revenue stream. These can be funded from redirected subsidies, transfers from profitable blue segments, or, for example, licensing income. With the instruments available, we ask ourselves how we organize the funding of these initiatives. One way to support a wide range of financial needs is through the creation of long-term blue finance facilities in the form of a fund or an SPV. The financial vehicle can be used to raise funds and hold funds for a well-defined, dedicated purpose, providing transparency and signaling focus and long-term commitment to all shareholders. Funds can be sourced from a wide range of stakeholders with very different risk and return expectations, and tenors and patients, such as local and regional shareholders, government, banks, businesses, but also from international development institutions and foundations, which could provide concessional loans and grants. As a result of access to a range of a different type of capital and income expectations and tenors, it can provide a range of financial support to cover the risks mentioned before. As an example of ADB's innovative financing work, I would like to present the Asian Catalytic Green Finance Facility for Southeast Asia, which was established to accelerate green infrastructure investments. But now it also includes a 350 million window for blue projects and ocean health, courtesy of the Korean government. In addition, we're working with the governments of Indonesia and Cambodia to implement such financial facilities. However, funding is only one piece of the jigsaw that needs to come together to develop and finance the local rural projects. The first step is normally agreement with the government on a regional or national blue initiative. Then we work on the selection of a local financial intermediary to set up the finance facility and manage the funds. The third step is the nomination of locally designated officials, which need to be incentivized to source and develop projects locally. The development of business models for the local initiatives can be supported with consultants funded by technical assistance. As you hear, there are many challenges, and we need all hands on deck to build a resilient blue economy. We're looking forward to working with you to make this happen. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Asian Development Bank for that. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, because there were some very important points there about, how those big sums of money filter their way down to the people that really matter, who are the fishermen and the people living in the coastal communities. There was one thing that Ingrid said there that really triggered in my mind the thought where she said, we need a blue fund, and how do we get the blue fund to fund these projects which don't have revenue sources but are absolutely essential for us. And we put over $20 billion a year of public funds into fisheries subsidies which are being used for overcapacity. Overcapacity means we finance industrial fleets to go out and chase diminishing stocks of fish. The madness of that. Imagine that $20 billion fund ending up, those funds of public money, ending up in a blue fund where we can do rational things to help with coastal communities in their resilience and sustainability. So anyway, that was a great video. I really enjoyed that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to move to the question and answer segment. I'm rushing a bit because we are behind time, but fear not. I'm going to put these 10 questions to our distinguished panelists because they're good ones that have come in from around the world. And I'm going to, each panelist is going to be asked 2 questions. I do ask that they, keep their answers to about 3 minutes so that we can get through them all, because they're good questions and they cover what the sort of stuff we've been talking about so far. First question, and I ask you to sit up, Tiago, because I'm going to direct it your way. Mark Spalding, who is president of the Ocean Foundation, he has posed the following question to the panel generally, but as I say, I'll ask you to answer it, Tiago. What Mark says is the Ocean Foundation, in collaboration with Credit Suisse and the Rockefeller Asset Management, have already raised about US $250 million to launch an ocean engagement fund to meet the increasing demand from institutional and private investors to invest in the blue economy. So we have the capital to invest and an engagement strategy to advise and steer portfolio companies away from ocean harming practices through dialogue with their management teams. My question to the panel would be, which private sectors are the most urgent to move away from in terms of their harm of the ocean? Over to Tiago.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's a very good question. I think that we are now at a time where we need to move from speaking about blue economy in general to make choices, to choose, to come down to the sectors that can really create this helpful blue economy. And I stress the word helpful because we have to look now for a blue economy that can be part of the solutions, which means that can contribute to our main endeavor, which is decarbonization of our societies and economies. So based on this very important argument of a blue economy that needs to decarb or reduce carb, that can be an alternative to terrestrial activities, I will probably think that we will need to invest on the positive side of the equation, so to say. We need to invest on green shipping, electrified ports, renewables, as was mentioned, decarb aquaculture, the aquaculture of algae and bivalves, blue biotechnology, nature-based solutions for climate change, like creating and expanding mangroves, salt marshland, and seagrass beds. What not to do, which is what you asked directly, of course, is everything that keeps exploiting on a linear basis our natural resources, or that adds to carbonization. So, of course, I could also here invoke again this call to action, Rise Up, because it's very clear and bold on what not to do, like no more licensing for oil and gas drilling offshore, phase out current operations within a reasonable period of time. Be careful on seabed mining, because we should not continue developing and being innovative in activities that deplete the ocean environment. Be careful on new uses of the sea, like going strong on krill or moving into mesopelagic fishing. Of course, stop fishing ocean predators as a principle. Stop harmful meanings of fishing like destructive practices. Stop building our coastlines. Stop brown shipping in ports. And I like to use this expression, which is the contrary to green shipping, but we are still investing on brown shipping at the moment. And finally, also stop dams in rivers, which we know have been having a huge impact in coastal sediments and therefore also in the ability of coastal areas to be productive. On a nutshell, this is what I would suggest, Peter.
Very comprehensive. Thank you for that. I know UNDESA is capturing all this. That was a great list. I'm moving right along quickly, and I do ask that that the answers all keep within 3 minutes. So here we go. Second question. And this relates to, the COVID-19 pandemic and the financial crisis, which have been particularly damaging to small island developing states, especially those whose economies are largely dependent on tourism. Debt instruments and debt restructuring have been shown to be an effective tool to finance ocean protection measures, such as the 2016 debt conversion that the Nature Conservancy conducted with the Seychelles that secured protection of 30% of the Seychelles ocean and generated long-term sustainable financing for their protection. So Melissa Garvey, the Global Director of Ocean Protection at the Nature Conservancy, she's asked the panel this trifecta of questions. And just as a heads up, I'm putting this in your direction, Anthony Cox. Can you speak to the opportunities for expanding the use of debt restructuring to finance ocean conservation by coastal or island countries? How can the private sector, development banks, and/or multilateral financial institutions support debt instruments or debt restructuring to finance SDG 14 goals? And is there a role for bilateral debt forgiveness to spur ocean protection commitments? Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Peter. And that's a great question and a great set of questions. It's clearly since the COVID-19, we've seen an explosion in national debt related to trying to manage the COVID, and particularly in developing countries. And we've seen an upsurge in debt for nature swaps being proposed. It's not just in relation to oceans, but it's much broader than that. And there's a lot of attraction to it. You can see that a focus on national debt restructuring with an environmental or sustainability goal can help use public finance to support both development and environmental objectives. The Seychelles example is unique. It is hard to see much action, even with there are proposals outside. There are reasons for that. I mean, there is scope for expanding it, but these are complex processes with lengthy financial engineering. You've got to be careful about creating perverse incentives. You need to be very clear that the outcomes of these debt swaps are very country specific and negotiated extensively with local stakeholders. And so in this regard, we need to be sure that we need to recognise that ownership and leadership is essential. And the example of the Seychelles gave us that in spades. But in order for these kind of things to be more attractive, for these debt swaps to be more attractive, we do need to find the right balance between conservation and sustainable use, and to make sure that they benefit and are supported by local people. And this links up to the issue I raised in my first intervention, was around planning. Planning is essential to give investors, the debt holders, confidence that these debt for ocean swaps will not create perverse incentives and that they'll be seen through. In what can private sector banks and multilateral financial institutions do? Three things: transparency, planning, and engagement. I think this is core to the challenge. I just flagged two other things. The blue bonds, I think, is another area where a lot of folks are getting into the game. Seychelles actually gave out the first sovereign blue bond in 2018. I think this is another kind of debt instrument that needs to be taken into account. And also the potential for corporate blue bonds that we've seen spearheaded by the UN Global Compact. I think I'll leave it there, Peter, in the interest of time.
Thanks for that, Anthony. Great answer. Yeah, and so this whole area of debt for nature swaps, I think a lot of people have sat up and listened to what you've said there and what was asked by the Nature Conservancy. So third question is going to come to you, Stefanos Fotiou, because it's tourism related. And given the large number of small island developing states in the ASCAP region, I think you'd be interested and well placed to answer it. It comes from Martin Koring, who's the head of the Economies Group's World Ocean Initiative. And the question is, as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, The Economist Intelligence Unit forecasts global output and global trade to fall more sharply in 2020 than during the global financial crisis of 2008. The ocean economy has been affected severely by the downturn, including major ocean sectors such as shipping, fisheries, and tourism. Tourism accounts for around 10% of global GDP, and many small island developing states depend on tourism for a large share of their economic output and employment, including, for example, Maldives, Seychelles, and Fiji. In the light of the coronavirus pandemic, and seen through the lens of resilient sustainability, is it wise for such countries to return to such heavy dependency on tourism? And if so, what should they do differently? Over to you, Stefanos.
Thank you, Ambassador, and the colleague from the Economist for this question. I will start my answer by saying that I think any country, any economic activity should focus on diversity. I mean, the more monocultures we have of one economic activity, the bigger the risk and the less the resilience. At the same time, we need to recognize that when we talk about diversity of economic activities, there are places, and SIDS are places like this, but they have very limited resources to have a very diverse economy when it comes to the production sectors. So I think that, yes, indeed, the immediate impact of the COVID-19 has felt very much in the tourism industry. I'm reading the UN World Tourism Organization says that it might take as much as 4 years to return back to the numbers that we have before. And I think that still tourism will be a major income for the SIDS. But the question is, what should differently SIDS if they continue to doing this? And I would say three things. One is that they need to really focus on improving the sustainability of the tourism operations, and I'm not talking about the environment. First of all, it's the sustainability of the income from the tourism operations. Tourism is notorious, especially in the small island developing states, of creating something like an enclave and having a lot of expenses from the foreign tourists leaving the country. The tourism leakages, which sometimes are estimated to be from everything from 1/3 of the income from the expenses from an international tourist up to 80%. So these are money that they are not staying in the country. So they have a very large foreign ownership of the tourist businesses, and there's a lack of the local populations to benefit actually from the tourism. So I think on the way on building back better, the SIDS could see how they can focus from tourism, that it's arrivals and general income generated, to something that focuses on local income generation and local jobs. The second is that the overexploitation that comes many times from the tourism sector is a serious threat to the fragile ecosystems of the Asia-Pacific SIDS, because at the end, if they don't look at the carrying capacity of the ecosystems and how they can support tourism development, they will lose the main asset that they have for tourism development, which is the pristine environment. And the third is, of course, the sociocultural sustainability, particularly for many Pacific SIDS where there's a very big diversity of cultures, and there is a threat that international tourism could have negative impacts on the cultures. So I think that maybe the pandemic represents an opportunity to advocate for tourism in the sector, in the Pacific Islands. And one of the first jobs I've done in the UN system is I was running the Sustainable Tourism Program of UNEP. And the main advice we were giving, and I think it's the same advice 50 years after, is do not focus on arrivals, do not focus so much on what is the overall income, but focus on creation of local jobs, local income, and opportunities that tourism could support nature conservation and sociocultural development. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer there, Stefanos. Question number 4. Birgitta Lima of the Stockholm International Water Institute has sent us a question that I'm going to put to Mayor Helps. And the question is, with a growing portion of the world's population living in cities, ocean well-being is increasingly dependent on cities acting upon their responsibility to minimize harmful impacts downstream. Cities must not only reduce negative impacts, but should also be spearheading investments to maintain the ecosystem services that urban populations depend on for healthy lives, both within and outside their municipal boundaries. How should cities most effectively invest in their source-to-sea responsibility so that they become positive contributors and agents of change for SDG 14? That helps. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. It's a really good question, and I think coastal cities have a particular responsibility to tend to the ocean. So one of the things that we're doing here in Victoria that I think is really an innovative approach, we copied it from another city in Canada that isn't coastal, but we've created what's called a stormwater utility. So rather than just having residents and businesses allow their stormwater to go into the storm drains and out into the ocean for free or as part of the property tax system, we actually, people pay based on the characteristics of their property, whether it's green or gray infrastructure, they pay for the use of the stormwater system. And what that does on the flip side is if people want their stormwater utility bill to be reduced, we offer rebates, which act as incentives. So if you plant a rain garden, if you have a green roof, if you plant trees, there are all sorts of ways, if you do rainwater capture. Remarkable. We implemented it in 2016 and we've seen a shift. We've seen an improvement in the water quality, improvement in the water going into the ocean. And more importantly, we've seen our residents and our businesses take advantage of these incentives and invest in the kind of green infrastructure that's necessary. So that's been a really, really pivotal tool. And there's still more work to do. There's more incentives to offer, but it's a really, really great beginning point for managing the stormwater and rainwater runoff in a very innovative way that uses financing mechanisms to create incentives. The other thing that we're doing, and we got a little bit set back by COVID, is that we're participating in the United Nations Trees in Cities Challenge. Trees provide all sorts of benefits and create, biodiversity, maintain biodiversity. So that's another small piece of the puzzle. And then we're significantly investing, as noted earlier, in the initiative to create the Ocean Futures cluster and innovation hub, which will help local companies to develop all sorts of solutions that will help maintain the biodiversity of the oceans and to work towards greening our shores in all sorts of ways. So the stormwater utility, though, I think is a really good news story, and I wanted to take the opportunity to share that with you. So thank you, Ambassador.
No, thank you, Lisa. And just let me take the opportunity to thank you for all the other SDG work, which I know you do support the UN so strongly, and it's deeply appreciated. You know, I find this urban green infrastructure movement that you can see happening around the world now so inspiring. You know, it's amazing what people can do in their communities to take responsibility for all this urban detritus, and I say that as a reluctant urban dweller, that we create, you know, and so these green infrastructure investments are really important. Okay, here we go. Fifth question. Comes all the way from Samoa, from my friend Kosi Latu, who's the Director General of the South Pacific Regional Environment Program. And since it relates to climate change, I'll put it to you, Babita. Question is, in the Pacific region, the threat of climate change-induced changes into the ocean is perhaps more existential than anywhere else on the planet. Many of the targets in SDG 14 have relevance for managing our coasts and the ocean in a way that builds resilience to climate change. What do you see as the key area that requires investment in SDG 14 to help communities that rely on the sea for their livelihoods and for food security in the face of a changing climate? Over to you, Babita.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. I think thank you for the question, Mr. Latu. And I think Samoa has played a really important role in the Green Climate Fund in terms of our board and really pushing in this simplified access procedure, which is very important for especially small island states. And I think, again, and thank you for your question, because it also frames some of our work for these regions in particular. For us, again, there's a clear synergy between ocean action and climate action, with the links between food security, ecosystems restoration and management, including marine and coastal management, which is key. And one of the fundamental principles of the Green Climate Fund is that we are country driven. And so, what are the priorities from countries and how can we support that in terms of their journey towards low emissions, climate resilient pathways. Having said that, and in the Pacific particularly, right now we're looking at a very exciting project, multi-country, maybe 5 to 15 countries. We are usually shy about talking about initiatives that are in the pipeline, but I think this is it's an exciting one. And it relates to the point, I think, that you're mentioning about livelihoods, food security, and climate change, in that this project is addressing one of the key challenges where most of the countries rely on licensing the waters for tuna fishing. I think 50% of the tax revenues come from that. And because of the warming Pacific, tunas have changed their migratory paths and have gone to other waters in other countries. And so really the long and short of it is really looking at fishery, revenue sharing, management, coral reef restoration, and being able to have a much more integrated approach that really resonates with the different multiple challenges, but also the synergies that's really there. And I think you might hear me saying this a little bit more if you talk to me more, this whole value chain approach that we want to have as we look at supporting countries in this area. Another example is obviously Tuvalu and the coastal protection project that we have, helping them address the impact of rising sea levels because of the increasing frequency of cyclones. And again, this project has so many different components to it, climate resilient infrastructure, for example, in terms of managing coastal inundation risks, protecting more than 2,500 miles of high value vulnerable coastline, but also ecosystem initiatives, beach nourishment, et cetera, and capacity development, because again, that is also hard to how we want to make sure that, it is rooted in terms of both new technology and new ways of doing things, but also in terms of sustainability. So I hope this kind of answers in a nutshell the fact that we are open for business. There are all these links that we see, and we really want to partner with others to make sure that we can do more and better and faster.
Bravo! Good to hear Tuvalu get a mention on these airwaves. Look, folks, we've asked the first 5 questions. There's another 5 to go, and I really would like to hear just one last time from each of the panelists, because these are such great answers that they're giving to these very good questions. We're going to run a little bit over time, I can see that, but we should finish everything up by 11:15 EST. So the next question, the 6th question, and this is going to come to you, Anthony, as your second question. Sweden's ambassador for the ocean, Helen Agren, has posed a big question on ODA that has 3 parts to it. I think it would be most appropriate for you to take it, Anthony, since OECD does a lot of work on this. Helen asks, according to the OECD report, Sustainable Ocean for All, only 50% of the limited amount of ODA that is allocated for the ocean economy is directed to a sustainable ocean economy. How can we ensure the full amount of ODA directed at the ocean is going to sustainable uses? And how can we persuade donors to increase that level? And how can ODA be used to mobilize private capital and perhaps also to reorient private finance from harmful activities? We touched on that earlier. So that's Helen's question to you and to answer, please, Anthony.
Thanks very much, Peter. And I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record here. The short answer to Ambassador's question is planning, transparency, and engagement. And both developing countries and developed countries have a role to play here. For the developing countries, it's clear they need to develop these holistic, cross-sectoral, national sustainable ocean economy strategies. and the financing strategies that go with them. This has to be an integrated approach to the management of land and sea and coastal areas. And they have to get really involved with the ocean knowledge and innovation networks that are out there. And on the developed country side, the donor side, transparency is key, monitoring is key. So we need to track ODA to make sure that it is going to the sustainable ocean economy and base it on common definitions and principles, which is where my link to the taxonomy discussion comes back. We do need to use this ODA to improve the commercial viability of investments through things like blended finance. We've had some discussion around that today from some of the panelists, and looking at the blended finance principles that the OECD has in place is key here. And we do need to integrate ocean sustainability requirements into all the ODA and development finance institutions lending. There's these mandates, and this transparency and accountability is key. I'll leave it there, Peter.
Great answer, Anthony. Thanks for that. And certainly we will take that up with the governments we're talking to in relation to ODA. Seventh question. One of our registered participants, Mari Romani of the MedPan network, has a question for the panel. And I'll put it to you, Stefanos, because ESCAP has got many hundreds of small and immense marine protected areas. The question is, how can we reinforce and sustain financing resources to reach effective management of existing marine protected areas? Over to you, Stefanos.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I think we need to make the financial case for investing in marine protected areas. And I want to share here 2 points. One is some points from a global experience on what it means to invest in marine protected areas. And then I want to focus on an area of a case from the Pacific. So in all cases, we have seen that the benefits of managing the marine protected areas exceed the cost across a very big range of scenarios. And in the most positive scenarios, the benefit to cost ratio of creating and maintaining marine protected areas could be as high as 20-1. And under all scenarios, from many studies, the benefits are in all cases more than triple the cost. So this is a big message that investing in marine protected areas makes great financial sense. I want to share a particular example from Palau, which in 2015, with the National Marine Sanctuary Act, established a marine protected areas that covered 80% of its water. And it became actually a kind of champion on ecotourism. And I want to mention 3 numbers here from this example. One is that by having this marine protected area, Palau managed to be a kind of champion on shark diving. And shark diving ended to bring to Palau the equivalent of 8% of their GDP every year. 8% of their GDP just from one activity. And the same activity was bringing 40% of the country's business tax revenue. So there's extremely good evidence that investing and in marine protected areas and investing in maintaining the marine protected areas makes great economic sense. So I want just a last point to stress the need for blue-green synergies. Let's not forget the role that protected areas play in climate mitigation through the carbon sequestration also. And by this way, we will understand what are the additional benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefanos. And my next question is going to go to Tiago. As someone who's advised governments on ocean issues, I think this is relevant to you. My friend Enric Sala, the explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C., has the following question. World leaders have ranked SDG 14 lowest in their priorities. It's a controversial thing for Enric to say, but let's put it that way. They've ranked it lowest in their priorities. But isn't a healthy ocean essential to our survival and also to a healthy global economy? I think I know what your answer will be, but go ahead.
Not difficult, because I would say yes, and a resounding yes, of course, Peter. I think that the issue, when we think of the ocean, the importance of the ocean for our survival, is that contrary, I think, to climate change impacts, which have came earlier and stronger than forecasted, the ocean impacts are still very little felt by most people. I wouldn't speak for indigenous people, small-scale fishers, people that knows, but most people indeed are not aware that corals are disappearing. They don't see it coming. We probably do not suffer at this moment physically with an increase in temperature in the ocean water. And therefore, there is still a lack of perception of the ocean problems. And we think that these are problems, yes, but for the whales, for the fish, not for us humans. Our problems are other problems, financial problems, security problems, migration problems. And so I think that it is important to invest on literacy. I would say that we have to be even more clear in our speech, because if one thing is that the ocean, and in pandemic times we should use appropriate analogy, the ocean has been the best medicine we found so far for climate change. The ocean stores CO2 like forests, but the ocean also stores the heat, which forests do not do in the same measure. So I think that in this respect, the oceans are in the line of our survival clearly as being the best medicine for climate change. And just a word about our economy. Yes, they are critical for our economy, because globalization, which is what moves us around, is basically international trade, and international trade travels by sea. Shipping is now part of the problem, and we need to transform it in a solution in the future. So there is a lot to do there, because we won't be able to have shipping as a problem when shipping is 90% of the international trade travels by sea. Also, I think food security. We only have 17% of our protein intake coming from marine origin. I think that we will need to potentiate the ocean as a source of marine protein, but for that we will need to create a new category of aquaculture, the decarb category. We will need to invest on multi-trophic, on algae and bivalves aquaculture that actually removes CO2 from the ocean. And I would say that finally we have the new uses, the renewable energies, and of course the bioprospection for blue biotech products, because they will be key for a new bioeconomy. And this is an economy which the world will need it, which will allow us, as I said before, to dissociate raw materials from natural resources. And I would end this way. Thank you very much, Peter.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Tiago, for that and for your input. Two more questions, and then we can all take a rest. But these are very important questions. One comes from my friend on the west coast of North America, so I'm going to put it to Lisa Helps because you're on the same coast, but I think it's one that would interest you. So Daniela Fernandez, who's the CEO of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, has asked for your views on this. There helps. You oversee civic planning and spending for a port city that has many elements of the sustainable blue economy, from being a port for international shipping, to seafood, to coastal protection, to hosting a major tourism industry that includes whale watching and a tall ships festival and yachting. In the wake of the coronavirus epidemic, how do you envisage the responsibility of local government to spur financial investment and incentivize civic engagement as it relates to the implementation of SDG 14? Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you much for the question, and it's an important one. As I noted in my beginning remarks, that we have been, I would say, overly reliant on tourism, on the arrival of people from around the world, and we welcome that. We're a beautiful city, and you should come and visit, and on cruise ships. And so as we're thinking about building better, the city is looking at what is our role in stimulating the economy, the ocean economy that we want for the future. The cruise industry is a really, really challenging one because there are a number of businesses in our community that are heavily reliant on it. But many of the jobs related to the cruise industry, both on the boats and on the shores, are low value jobs, you know, retail and souvenir stores and so on. And so we do have a lot of work to do, going back to the question, to engage our local residents to think differently about what good jobs look like that are related to the ocean economy. So again, the Ocean Futures Innovation Hub and the Ocean Futures Cluster are part of that, trying to understand how we can capitalize on the ocean at the same time as implementing SDG 14. I will say that in industry, large and small, and certainly in our residential community, there is strong support and deep attachment to the ocean, but there are difficult conversations to come about what does the future of Victoria as a small port city look like? How reliant can we be on the cruise ship industry? We're the busiest cruise port in all of Canada. How reliant can we continue to be on that if we're truly committed to SDG 14? So difficult challenges ahead, but I think our residents and our business community are open to those conversations. And I don't think there's one person in our city, either in the business or the residential community, who doesn't understand the integral link that we have to the ocean and to the ocean's future.
Thanks very much for that. Let me just say that one of my firm beliefs is that we are on the cusp of the great change in the powering of our global shipping fleet. And that I do think that cruise ships, and some already are, I know in Norway they are operating in very environmentally friendly conditions in terms of propulsion and feeding and what waste management and all the rest. So I think that, yes, the cruise industry needs to have a very good look at itself. But it does have a future if it is part of that greening of the shipping industry. And, you know, as you know, with ammonium hydrogen fuel coming at us very fast now as a replacement for bunker, that's a great first step. For the last question, ladies and gentlemen, I'm putting this to Green Climate Fund. Peter, get ready. And the question comes all the way from Madrid in Spain, where Remy Parmentier of the Vada Group has this question. Given that the Green Climate Fund is a global funding platform set up to respond to climate change by investing in low emission and climate resilient development, and given the urgency and seriousness of this challenge, and given the fact, as demonstrated by recent reports of the OECD, the IPCC, Because the Ocean, the Friends of Ocean Action, the High Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Action, and many others, that the sustainable blue economy is an essential part of an effective response to the climate crisis, how can the GCF envisage increasing its funding support to SDG 14's goal of conserving and sustainably using the ocean's resources? I think you've already addressed this, but you might want to just underline some of your main points, Babita. Over to you.
Right, thank you so much. And indeed, I think the reason we are here, and again, we're so grateful to be part of this conversation, is to say that the Green Climate Fund is open for business on this topic, and we are really keen to get more projects focusing on oceans and the blue economy. We already have some very interesting projects in the pipeline, but again, you know, with a fund that is mandated to balance investments between adaptation and mitigation, with, you know, this investing in oceans, marine and coastal ecosystems have such good multiplier co-benefits, you know, this is a really important priority definitely for us. We've also seen that ecosystems are appearing in more than 105 nationally determined contributions, the NDCs that governments are supposed to enhance, not just update, in the lead up to COP21. And again, I think it's a priority in over 40% of the country programs or briefs that is submitted to us. So I think that's a good kind of indication of interest, but also, you know, for us to respond to this is really important. And again, for us, the key opportunities is to foster transformative change in conserving and sustainably using the ocean's resources, which could include, and sometimes we're careful with language, integrated coastal zone management, covering coastal and marine ecosystems, fisheries, and aquaculture. And again, I think we see a high value in terms of looking at coral reefs, seagrass, seaweed beds, mangroves, coastal and salt marshes because of the benefits, but also in protecting coastal communities and at the same time preserving the blue carbon ecosystems. And we could be also looking at creating incentives for restoring the blue carbon ecosystems, improving fisheries management, promoting coastal resilience, combating beach erosion, and engaging coastal communities in developing ecosystem-based options, and supporting the development of innovative financing. It's really important to us, such as parametric insurance for protecting coral reefs. I think stepping back, GCF is like the Amazon of climate finance. We are very flexible in terms of the range of themes that is on offer. And again, it really depends on our partners and how we can identify those that can really promote a paradigm shift. Again, that's part of our mandate, the truly transformative catalytic. And so again, the menu is really very broad. I'd just like to focus on a few quick points mentioned earlier, and that's just three. One is debt swaps for nature and climate resilience that was mentioned before. And I think just to say that for us, Antigua and Barbuda have already requested for a readiness grant from us, which is the capacity building fund that we have, our window, to assess the policy, regulatory, and institutional issues that are important to really structure something like a debt swap. And I think the nature conservancy model is important, and I think again it's really good that I understand that's being scaled up. And again, we probably need to have, and these are discussions going on in different places, but I think we do need to connect the dots also, because from our perspective, we cannot buy debt. But if the creditor country transfers the creditor rights to us, then we have a way to convert that debt in local currency, and that gets channeled to climate-related projects. Put it very simply, for example. Then on the issue of tourism, we are in discussion with several countries in the Caribbean, and I believe the Pacific also, again, looking at multi-country initiatives and how could we aggregate and bundle these up and then pitch it to the institutional investors, because scale is important. Again, that's hopefully we can make more traction in some of these areas. And green shifting, of course, we have some interesting initiatives in the pipeline, and again depends on how fast we can get this through, working with all a different range of partners. But again, to say that we are there, we are at your disposal, and again, there's a range of exciting things that we can do, but I know we can do more.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Babita. That was a great response to Remy's question. Look, at this stage, I'm supposed to be summarizing. You can see all my notes here, but we are about 20 minutes over time. So I think I'll just wrap things up by saying, first of all, to the panel, fantastic. Thank you so much for all the time and mental energy you've put into this as part of your preparations and delivery. Great, really. We at DESA and at my office have captured all these ideas and will be using them going forward. I think between now and the UN Ocean Conference, you can be sure that one of the hot topics for SDG 14 will be how to turn on those taps to make up that shortfall that Undersecretary General Liu highlighted in his opening remarks. It's unacceptable to have that gap. We all know that the recovery must be a blue-green recovery. So I think this has been very timely, but you'll see many more of these financing discussions, blue finance discussions go on between now and when we hold the UN Ocean Conference next year. So thanks so much to the panel for being part of this. I'll skip the summary that I was going to give you, but I would also like to just give a word of thanks to the fantastic team at my office and at UNDESA in New York who've put this together. None of this goes off smoothly, as you've seen today, without all those people knowing what they're doing and being committed to doing it right. So to all who are involved, as we say in Fiji, levu, and I look forward to meeting up with all you panelists and all you participants who've hung in there with us for the last 2 hours when we gather together next year at the UN Ocean Conference. I'll see you all in Lisbon. Naka.